its main advantage is more surface area. Also, the airflow is better. You're taking it from the direction it's coming, and you're not going to push it up towards the carburettor. You're actually going to push it down under the footboard more. It would also have a split cowling that I've not got printed out that would again direct the airflow more towards the exhaust. So we can get rid of the obviously exhaust is massively hotter than even the warm air coming out of the head cowling, so we can still use it for cooling if we put it as something hotter. So yeah, there'll be another one of those wait and see items as time gets to it.
When you say wait and see, you mean it's just you
We've
playing
not got
about
there. Yes, at the moment this is like many of my projects. This is me going, okay, this is what we do next. When I actually get to the point of we need to have that done, which won't be long on the 250 cylinder heads. I'm getting lower on the Mammoth 250 heads, so we'll have to do them. And the current tooling can only do so many heads before you end up having to replace it anyway. We're quite close to that point. Yeah. So this will probably be 2, maybe 3 years. But at that point, I'll have to get 250 heads probably first done. And yeah, that's a very good representation of what I'm expecting to make. I'll be putting this, the reason I have them printed like this is I'll now have different bikes on the bench. I will fit this loads and loads of times, and I'll find that it doesn't fit with the JL3, or it does fit with, all the problems that are going to come up, hopefully, I'll have found a good number of them. Then, yeah, we can be confident what we put out will be as compatible with as many things as we can.
Is that, I mean, we talked earlier about the 3D printer. Would you say that's one of the biggest advantages of it for you? For me,
yes. I love the 3D printer.
I know you do. But that you can print something out and try it for size.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, those manifolds have been fitted to bikes. I can give you the pictures of those all attached to while I was finding the position. So I don't nail it first time. That one's probably the 8th version of that one. Because the last version I haven't got because I sent that to the manufacturer.
Right, so basically you've got 8 versions of that manifold.
Yeah, I've got piles of these that are
20 years
recycled.
So 20 years ago when you were doing that, if you were going to do that, you'd have drawn something up on paper, possibly on CAD on a computer, and then had to go to a foundry to get one sand cast.
Yes.
To bring it back, to fit it,
and
to
it would cost you for every iteration. You'd have paid the tooling again,
and then discovered that it didn't clear the cowlings.
Yep.
So you'd have thrown it away, and so that's the.
This does allow you to then play in 0.5 millimeters. You can happily go, this could be tiny bit better. So you just throw another one out, and then you see if that one is that tiny bit better, or then you find it hits the engine mount, and you shift it, and you find where your best position is.
I'm guessing. I mean, obviously, that isn't free. It still comes at a price.
The actual prints, these ones are actually a very cheap print to do because I didn't need any support material. So that print probably cost me about £1.50, £2, something in that region. But you're also looking at that would take about, I think that print was around about a 10-12 hour print, something in that range. That's a 4-day print. So that's the printer going solidly for 4 days
for that
to print that. That also went wrong 4 times before I managed to get a print to successfly finish, because I was having a problem with the support material.
So when you say the support material, what's that?
It's PVA. So this material is PLA, which is polylactic acid. That's a very glass-like plastic. It's brittle and very hard, so it's really useful for getting a dimensional shape of something. It prints lovely. But you can't print onto nothing, so you can see where it's not done a brilliant job on the surface finish here. That's because this surface was being supported by PVA, polyvinyl chloride. What's that? Oh, I forget. It's the same glue you use in schools. But you effectively print that. Then because like the glue in schools is water soluble, I drop this in a bucket of water with a little fish tank motor in it. It blows water around it overnight, and by the morning all the PVA is dissolved, and I can then pull this out of there, clean up any bits that aren't quite right, and have a go at fitting it and see if it works. But that will have cost me cost Dad, because he supplies my plastic habit, about 40 quid, because I used PVA and I had to do it many times and it just kept going wrong.
And how many days did that take?
That's a 4-day print.
So 40 quid of material and 4 days worth of electricity?
In order to get that out. Although the electric's actually quite small. You're only heating a tiny bit of plastic at a time, so it's not that many watts.
And the manifold was about £1.40, did you say?
Yeah. If you're looking at like the crankcase on there, you're looking at over a month of printing to get that where they would be. And then again, you've got ones that failed. So my gearbox messing around for a rear disc brake, that failed. This is the print stopping at one point. I just felt that there was enough print there that I could still use it for a particular purpose, so it's still like a tool.
So sorry, what was that meant to print out?
What I was after is I was printing out, you'll see these like dovetail joints. This is far too big to fit in my printer. So I print it in several pieces that then dovetail together.
Right.
This would have been another back end.
This, he's talking about a whole engine case.
Yeah, so if I pull that one out, it makes it a bit easier to see what we're up to. That was one of the very first things I did on the 3D printer. Was at the time we'd been going to develop a new crankcase. Dad had given me the remit that I had to be able to fit a completely standard engine with just seals and bearings had to be able to be built on it. Other than that, I could do anything I liked. So I looked at lots of different cylinders and came up eventually with the TRX Honda cylinders, because there's loads of aftermarket bits for them. That's 450 quid for it's a 75 brake horsepower 300cc cylinder. It has a power valve, it's got all the kit you'd want, and it's 450 quid. So it's like, well, let's build the engine to make it fit that. All the plumbing is in there. It doesn't have to be fed through the crankcase like your CR would, or many of the other the YZ cylinders and so on. So it looked like a really nice one to do.
Sorry, what the story behind the blue casing?
That was my because I had this in 2D drawings a long time before, and actually just about the same time we were developing the RB22, there was the intent to do a crankcase then, and my first kind of design efforts were then, and we went around a lot of different manufacturers, and effectively I couldn't find a manufacturer that could give me the support to do it. I just couldn't get there at that point. So I then got the 3D printer, chucked that design into the CAD so that I could then print it out as just being one I could have a little look at. So
which is this blue
part
engine.
of your idea here is this shows it quite nicely, but this would just be a packer. That would come out and let you fit the standard crank when it's in there. You'd take it out. Now you could fit a much bigger crankshaft into there. So then you would have this thing, which is a 72 stroke crankshaft with a whole lot more material on it to be able to take the much larger engine that would be then fitting on the top. And then obviously did a full-sized version of it with, there's a lot of modification steps between this one and that one. So as much as but a lot of the main features are still there. So you can see that I was already looking at trying to make sure you could have crankcase reed induction is part of that one from the word go. If that whole thing lines up nicely, you'd have had that all in there. You'd have actually fitted the RB reed valve in there. And it actually does fit. The only thing I needed to change was you have a different adjuster block because I need the cables out the way for the carburettor. We'd designed it at that point around a little Tillotson carburettor, but you can fit the 34 Del Auto with it as well with a different manifold. The Tillotson is beautiful. Your airflow is like you look down the Tillotson, open the throttles, the butterfly moves, and you can literally look straight into the transfers. And you're like, I couldn't make that flow part any better than that. So yeah, it was a lovely project to have the opportunity to play around with. I'd even done it so you could very quickly modify between which it was going to be fitting, whether it was Lambretta or whether it was TRX. Yeah, it would have been a lovely project to do.
So why did it get shelved, or what happened?
Because we felt that the quantity we would require in order to make the thing at the right price was just too high. We didn't think there was enough market for it. So yeah, in fact you can see in that one, even with the RB kit on there. Now you would cut the skirts to suit it as you're looking at the cylinder skirt then, but you're looking straight into the inlet. Yeah, and that would be built up effectively for standard. Whereas the other version on there, that was an earlier variant. Later on I added the adjustable timing to it, so you'd have an external pickup box that goes in there and lets you make a quick adjustment when you drop that one down. That shows you what would be the complete engine. So we all bolt together.
So that complete engine is printed in how many parts?
You can see how many dovetails there are in there. This is months of printing. They're an insane amount of time to get that
that mag flange is what, about 5 parts?
1, 2, 3. Yeah, 3 parts for the mag flange. Right. Plus you've got the centre bearing section, and you've got the packer that you'd put in there. come full circle thing. So that design was there for ages, not doing anything because it was not going forward. But then when Manish asked us about making a sports version of a mag flange, I was able to just go, okay, we can do that. I've already done it.
Right.
So you'd now have a drive side seal plate style thing to hold the bearing in, so the seal in. That would be the version that you would then have as being for without the seal, which lets you fit a wider crankshaft. So using the Uni crankcase, you could then have the whole section, because when we were doing the Uni crankcases, we were also thinking ahead for what was going to happen crankshaft wise. So we had them put a lot more meat around the mag flange, around where the crankshaft goes. So in your standard casing, you see that kind of low here. Yeah. It's not, so we can bore straight through. The result is you can now take a crank that's 12 millimeters wider than the standard crank. You post that into there. Just find my position to get that in. The chamfers on the edges of these, the chamfers on the edges of the webs are necessary, and then you would put that mag flange on top of it. I'm going to remove that O-ring. That's like a belt and braces seal. You've already got a gasket there, and that would then sit on there. Got stuff in the way, but you can see then we've got a crank 12 millimeters wider than original in the crankcase without a great deal of effort, and we can make it slightly longer stroke. So you've got we've already got kits designed for a 62 stroke crank, so we would get it done in 62, but the steps to get there will be Manish making the mag flange first. Lots of folk will then run those with that plate instead of this plate on there. They've got the adjustable pickup box timing position there. We've still kept the vestigial thing from here, which is if you've got enough torque going through your engine, you can crack the crankcase. You can solve that by closing the box. So you would use these as mounting points to another arm that would come back, and if you've looked at the Piolini Evolution crankcase, they have a rear hub nut with like a centre section that matches a bearing. Put the bearing on the swing arm straight up.
A bit like a T-sub for auto.
Yeah, that's the stuff. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you close the box, you've now put the force somewhere to stop it managing to move as much, and it's a vestigial thing because I think very, very few people will end up using it. But there are always going to be those few who do. So yeah, it was add as much in there as I can. What will happen prior to manufacture is we'll almost definitely lose the, I used like a nut in there, which is like a 90-degree nut. These things do exist for putting windows together, but not exactly the right design. So we'd have to get a special fixing made for that. And I don't think it's worth it. So we're probably not going to have that part. You'll just stick with the original style cowling.
Really? Because how are you going to fix it? I think personally one of the great things about this style cowling are the bolts that go in that way.
It's brilliant for speed. Absolutely.
But also it's
the most finicky thing on that restaurant.
Yeah. It's not just speed, but it's when
I'm still
new
stuck. I can be
more
persuaded as we are at that point in the design process, but it adds quite a lot of cost to do it that way. It's far simpler if you just stick with the original cowling. But
I mean, the J, the Lambro and the Louis all had go on the fronts. You can see that's where Innocenti were going.
So then you've got full lines here. But when you look at the snail coming out the shell of the centrifugal fan, you don't want these there. You're making the airflow whack into it at every stage. So the purpose of then doing it so that you could have those short little nuts in there is actually just to mean that the airflow still works well. Also, this design still got the older shape there, which we had a bit of testing. You can bolt one of those into a normal magnet. So that, which way round? That's the way. That bolts into there, and just the centrifugal fan is not supposed to have this whole area here. You're trying to scoop the stuff out and send it in the direction you want. So adding that fin just actually helps direct the airflow that bit better. That gets included in that design. And these are a relatively easy thing to then just fit and actually immediately monitor the change. Now, quite a lot of the race bikes are already doing stuff very similar to that. So that's again not an original idea. That's just a
mag flange. You're looking at doing that production on the new mag flange. Am I right?
That would be, so if we take that front off, we can then include it in the option to be able to later fit a wider crank.
And so that'd have like, if
what you're
the
looking at then
is to redirect the air.
Yeah, a splitter. And what I was saying with the other part was you're not then blocking this part of the area because you're not using full length like that one. Then you've got your adjustable pickup box, which is just beautiful because you can actually have the engine running You put your timing marks on there, and you could say, okay, I'm putting a high octane fuel in. Let's give ourselves a bit more advance. Or I've just put some horrible fueling somewhere I shouldn't have been. I'll back her right off. So that bit actually that gives you where you'd put your timing mark. So you could, and like if you were running a bike on a dyno, you could be holding it at 6,000 RPM and literally shift that about and go, you know what, that's nicer just there. And then obviously you could go for programming or whatever you did after to solve that problem.
And there's a lock on the back then, is there?
You've got 2 little Allen screws, so all you do is just loosen those off like they are now, and that lets you move it, tighten them, and it'll lock it down. So you'd not have to strip the bike at all, you'd just literally have a little Allen key, just loosen them off, and you could do it in a very short space of time. You've also got the little feeder hole that you'd take the grub screw out of if you were going to use to help with pressure differential to get flow into that bearing if you were not using the normal seal plate. So you're using that one instead of that one. The seal plate would have another little O-ring built into that part. The O-rings, they're just there as belt and braces in most of the bits. So you've got a gasket and you've got other seals there. But yeah, it doesn't hurt to have the extra space for it.
On a grand scheme of a calendar then,
these are an unknown. We're
so
still
it's
kind
literally
of playing. Manish is keen to do one. I'm keen to have, but at the moment I can't find a crankshaft manufacturer to help me as I need with the crankshaft design and to manufacture it at a price point I'm happy with. That doesn't mean that won't happen, because we might do that with the effectively supply them all with that style seal plate. And then at a later date, if we come back to the crankshaft, it's already there.
Right, so what you would think, but as a product at the moment, the benefits of the mag flange as it is, without the potential changing of a crank, are
slightly better airflow, adjustable timing on an external pickup box,
and potentially
very small number of folk make the crankcase more rigid by adding a support point, but I'm not supplying bits for that yet. That's just the vestigial.
And potentially the fastening of the fan cowling onto it as a front piece.
That might be a thing that we do with those little nuts that position.
Do you not think
can take the mag flange small bit of seal out this way
from the outside rather than the inside?
If you wish to.
So you don't think that's I mean, you said it may be something that could be offered. Do you not think that is a product that's worth offering as it is?
It's going to come down again to that price point problem. It's find out how much it will cost to get and how many we'd need to have manufactured, decide what we think we could actually sell, and as long as that all lines up, it'll happen. I do expect this product to make it where that one failed, but as I say, the ideas are pretty much
talking about
older product idea that then get recycled into a newer product. If it doesn't come out like this, there's still very likely that we'll have some of these ideas turn up in something else. They're looking to redo the headsets. We've given them some information, so we'd like to include mounting points for putting hydraulic master cylinders inside the headset so they're out the way behind where the headlight is, so you'll have a mounting point to take the cable into a hidden master cylinder. It would mean that you're not, for anyone normally buying it, you'd just have a little bit of extra casting. It does nothing, but then you'd also have the option of buying a master cylinder and making that do something extra. There were a couple of other little changes in it, but that was the big headline one, why you might buy their headset bottom instead of the standard one.
Would that just be GP or?
It would be GP was the only one we were looking at the moment. If it proved to be very successful, absolutely, Manish would be more than happy to look at various other versions. But initially we were just looking at the GP, and it's probably going to be the Italian size, so it'd actually be the narrower where the handlebars are. People like the look of it more.
So he'd be making fresh tooling rather than using, what was it, SIL then?
Most of the SIL tooling just isn't good enough to keep using. It needs so much refurbishment, you're looking at replacing it.
Start again anyway.
And also, a lot of the manufacturers, it's split up between different companies. It's like the guys that did their leg shields, they aren't part of SIL. They're a separate company with I think it's a 200-ton press. Dad's binned their factory. The lights literally go out when they put the press down. But they would not give their tooling to somebody else, and they've said that tooling is no longer good enough to do it. And indeed, it's not any longer good enough to do it. So you either pay them to make new tooling, or at that point you go, well, there's loads of folk we could ask to do that. You reassess and decide who's going to do the best job and what you can do to get it. Unfortunately, that type of stuff, tooling is really expensive.
Yeah, of course,
And like we had the front mud guards, they've been redone. you don't sell enough of them. We'll have those mudguards for decades. I must have, I think we've got 350 front mudguards in metal. We don't sell one every month. We don't sell one every 2 months. And then you'll sell two, but it's really not a big seller. So it's very hard to turn that into being worth doing.
Is there anything in the, not saying this, I'll ask you in a minute what's in the pipeline, but is there anything that you think, if time and money were no object, that you would remake or get remade? Or
there's too many things in that category.
Okay.
If I won the lottery,
what one thing?
I would.
What one thing or one part? One
I'll tell you the part I most wish we had done that someone else did. SIP Speedo. We were developing a Speedo, and it would have been at least twice the price of the SIP one. I think it would have looked nicer, but then of course I designed the bugger. But their SIP Speedo is, to my mind, the best of everyone else's products. That if I could go, there's an item that we would have instead of you, I would have pinched that. That's an awesome. I love SIP Speedos. The temperature gauge is awesome.
Out of the stuff then that you've been involved with, what would you say is, I'll word it here, either the proudest or the parts that you've been involved with yourself?
Probably the Python approach, as that, again, it was one of those projects that just kept going. It took a long time to get it to where it was. That was the first effort to redesign the clutch to have more space in it and to give us something that was going to be, in fact not even the first, this was one of the developments of, and they made us a crown wheel which was a beautiful casting, much like you'd do with a rear hub. The steel and the aluminium were in one piece. Until 3,000 miles of very aggressive use, when you started to get an ever such a tiny amount of movement between the two parts. So you can't really perceive it. If I put some oil on it, you'd see that there's actually a tiny, tiny movement. Right. Given a bit of time more than that, and that'd be a problem. So we immediately became, okay, can't do it that way. That then forced us to look at different ways of attaching it. I went through about 4 or 5 different methods. We tried a few different methods of riveting. Finally came to the idea of, okay, we'll do it with riveting very close to the outside. That then became what we actually ended up with. And it had a knock-on advantage, because now we were making it literally in 2 pieces and putting them together. We were able to use a type of aluminium that you can't cast and can be CNC machined. It meant that the machining could then go straight through there. So where that one actually has a draft angle on these, so they're ever so slightly wider at the top than the bottom as you have to take the tooling out, this doesn't, meant that they're perfectly parallel. They're also an insanely harder aluminium that's, I wasn't even aware it was a thing till the factory told us, but it's both heat treated and double hard anodized, so that makes that aluminium really, really rigid and tough. Then the steel ring gear, because we were concerned at the wear side, where we previously, Surflex a number of years ago did make an aluminium crown wheel, and it just didn't last long enough, because we tested and the lifespan wasn't adequate. So we thought, okay, maybe you could do it with a different aluminium, but we'd rather stick with steel.
How long would it take from you coming up with the idea of the Python clutch to...
COVID got in the way, which is why that got thrown right out. Normally I'd be expecting 2 years, 3 years between where we get from having a design to actually getting it manufactured. As we mentioned earlier, finding the right manufacturer is genuinely the bigger part of the job. It's easy coming up with an idea. It's harder making it obey the laws of physics. It's harder to actually then come up with a design you think, okay, this could do it. But finding someone who can make it, that... protect those guys.
Because people don't sort of see that in the price, do they? Like, how much is a Python clutch?
£380 retail on there, and you could buy a house for what we cost to get that done. It's there's a lot in the development cost. When we're doing the disc brakes this time, I'll not give you the figures, but there is a very significant amount of money required to get to the point where we are now. If it all goes pear-shaped, it's and obviously things can. You hope, you test, you play, you try and get things as good as you possibly can. Obviously I don't want to put a part out that's going to put anyone in danger. It's a disc brake, it's vitally important it work. But once you get a few thousand out there, you find things that you just couldn't have found on your own. And my terrorising fear is always the end of a project. My favourite moment is just before you let people have something, because then I've done it, I've got the project, it's got all the potential in the world at that point, and it's only downhill after that.
Do you, in as much as like your dad sort of famously goes out into the A64 testing, do you You follow him?
I tend to, I can't
Well, not
follow
literally
Dad,
follow.
but yeah, no, when I follow Dad, he usually gets bored and then he disappears.
Right.
But you know, I do go out on the A64, and we've got lots of lanes just up on the tops here that can be good places for quiet roads and being able to test different things. It's like suspension and brakes are brilliant if you're going up on the tops around here, as it's bumpy as hell in lots of twisty bits, whereas the A64 is far better if you wanted to just see how fast something goes. Take it up to that. Or for the brakes, one of the things we were testing was what sort of heat loading do different brakes take. So if you take like the most common Nissin style disc brake that you're getting for Lambretta, take it up to about 80-90 miles an hour, then slam all on for a full emergency stop, bring it down to like 2 miles an hour. Don't actually stop, but just get it right down to the point where you can put your feet down. Then immediately blast it straight up to as fast as you can, get it back up to 90, then stop, then 90, then stop. By the 4th time you've done that, you're in fade. 5th time you've got a very poor brake, and you'll start having bits of the pad actually galling. You'll be removing bits of the pad. The disc will be smoking blue hot. You'll smell the acrid smell of the disc. You've not got another, there's no purpose in doing another. If you took our first version of the inboard disc, we'd tried to do it with a 3.5mm disc. Effectively your first 2 brakes were great. 3rd was properly in fade, and by the 4th you were at the place where the Nissin ones were in there at 5th. So we would go, okay, that's the benchmark, we need to be at least hitting what they're doing. So we increased the thickness of the disc, and I did a bit of maths and a little play and decided 6.5mm was going to be perfect. That would set us a nice amount above what they were doing. So I went to the factory and they said, well, if you want 6.5mm steel, we can, but it'll cost you a lot, as no one makes that steel in 6.5mm, we'll have to machine it all to suit you. So, but we make discs for Harley Davidson. They use 6mm discs. Magic. So okay, send us over a 6mm sample, which they could do quickly. As the steel's now on stock, on shelf, they could just cut one straight off, throw it straight at us. And that immediately gave us a massive amount more heat loading, because you've got more metal to heat up. At the same time, we also redesigned the windows to extract more air so that you could force more through, and looked at venting. But actually it was just the simplicity of making the disc a bigger chunk of steel that had the biggest effect. The others were, well, the windows is an option we may come back to. At the moment it's not part of the design, you're just going to fit standard windows. Okay. If someone was getting, really, to be using it on the road like that, how many people are cooking their Nissan brake? If you're doing that, you probably, the police should be involved. Like the way I'm testing it, I'd have to be exceptionally careful where I was testing it, because if you had anyone else using the same bit of test surface, you were going to have problems. You can't just suddenly slam on all in front of folk. That's not.
Well, you use a closed road, obviously.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. They get that space where it's safe to do so. But yes, then you find out what the limit is. Then you start obviously trying to get the feel to be what you'd like it to be, and that's where you start playing with the piston sizes and the pad material.
That'll come in the future. So you're looking.
Well, what it is you can pass more air through the disc. I'm just constantly trying to grab bits, as it's easier to make sense when you're looking at stuff. So we'd already made the section that lets the air in on the disc brake. We'd already changed the design, so more airflow went in here.
So that's the scoop at the back.
Typically, the scooping side is, and you even see the things you can buy, the extenders. They put a bigger scoop there. It doesn't work because the disc isn't getting the air back out. The restriction on the airflow through the disc is not the going in; it's the going out. So if you give it the ability to draw air out, so you make effectively a little aerofoil as part of the window, you can then draw air out and suck a lot more air through, and you'll get more of that passive cooling.
Right, so that's what you're looking at potentially in the future for this.
It's an option that we could use if we needed to. At the moment it's not necessary. And also, it depends what you're trying to be. What your problem you're solving, you're making the disc cooler, better. But if you're not actually getting it up to a very high temperature, there's no need to.
Yeah.
And if you're doing the kind of destructive testing of needing 5 full-speed, full emergency stop runs, it won't actually really help for that, because you're giving it a very small amount of time in which it could try to dissipate that heat. So even though you're putting a bit more air through, it wouldn't actually help the bit that's the bit we're trying to make it improve upon. It would bring the normal running temperature down, and if you were doing like gentle braking down a long hill, absolutely, that's what that would be for. But it's a small part.
Twisty alpine parts.
Yeah, if you were running down the Alps and you were going to be using the brakes a lot on the way down, that might absolutely be a good thing for you to do.
You were saying earlier as well, before we were recording, about the different brake pad materials.
Yes.
And Do you want to just take us through them?
We wrote off sintered straight away. All the sintered materials I've tried, effectively they need to be hot. That means that if you ride 10 miles, then need to do an emergency stop, you just don't have a brake. That's no good. Clearly for road use, you need it to work straight away. So we were looking at the mineral materials. Sintered absolutely has its place. If you're on the track and you're going to keep that disc hot, then that's the correct material to use. So you might choose to race with one of those disc brakes, and you might choose then a sintered pad. But for road use, it's utterly inappropriate. The semi-metallic materials and the mineral materials are definitely worth looking at then. We tested, because the type of pad is an off-the-shelf one. You can buy them from Brembo, Frando, you can buy the Galfa versions, you can get the Gold Line ones. There's an absolute range of different people making these. So I threw a lot of pads at it to see what effect they would have.
And then, sorry, just to clarify as well, the pads you're using in your disc brake are going to be off-the-shelf sizes?
Yes, so, absolutely. If you decide to buy a different pad, you can absolutely. And the one that would be most obvious for me to recommend for a road rider would be... I would have reckoned the Galfa 1054. I'll give Galfa the thumbs up. That is a fantastic pad material and not expensive. So really, that was the number one until I tempted the factory by sending them that feedback and said that, okay, the pads you've supplied, they're good, but the Galfa ones are better. And their factory then went, no, you're going to try, and sent me over another 5 materials, and we then found that I only know it currently because it's their proprietary blend. It's white. The gold ones before that weren't as good as the white ones. But the white ones are what are going to be supplied in there. They'll not be white when they're supplied, but that's how I can identify that material.
So from that aspect, then you've done the testing here and given the feedback to the factory, and they've tweaked and up their game accordingly, regards to both the disc and to the pads.
This factory has been exceptionally good. The first factory we tried got the idea that we were producing something for like a little 4 mile an hour electric scooter or something. So they under-spec'd stuff. And effectively I ended up getting upset with them. They weren't meeting what I wanted to do. They suggested an aluminium disc. So I was like, no. You can use we won't need to go in aluminium discs. But no. So we went into another company and we just couldn't quite get where we wanted to be with them. Similar things. They just weren't appreciating that we were going to put a lot through it. So the factory we're now dealing with, we sent them the stuff to say, okay, I've got an 18 stone rider who's quite likely to have a pillion doing 150 miles an hour and needs to be able to brake round a racetrack on a regular basis. And they came back to us and said, I
want to see that race.
They said the design of your disc brake is not adequate for that. I'm sorry, we can't make that. And that was essentially the thumbs up. I was like, brilliant, you guys have understood, you've assessed, and you've told me what it can't do. Now we can actually talk about what I need it to do. And then we could go through and I could effectively they gave us advice. I also gave them more different design bits. There's a lot in common with the disc brake design with the clutch design, because I was designing the same things. Clutches and brakes are the same. So you'll see that the floating disc actually runs on teeth, much like the steel plates of a clutch do. So your clutch steels are remarkably like the disc that's inside our brake. It also runs on teeth, and in the difference being that because a clutch is always compressed, you don't do anything to stop it rattling, whereas with a disc you're only compressing it when you actually want to stop. So we've got little ball catches that will push against the teeth from the inside, so that it gives it that bit of friction and makes it stay static. So when you apply brake to it, it will centralise the disc. Then when you release it, it's not going to move, it's going to stay in the centre. You've got pistons at both sides. They can move, so they're going to pinch in, and if the disc happened to be slightly to the right, this side will come out further. And then when you release it, it just both release that tiny bit. So by having both the disc floating and the opposed piston design, you have the minimum movement required to go between it having a nice amount of slip and fully gripped. That means that then you can get a really positive feel to the brake. The pad material is the bit that then is where that feel's coming from. So when you're testing a lot of the different pads, not just are you looking for the right amount of force that they can supply, you need to be able to stop the bike fast, it has to be able to take that, but you're also looking for that, how it feels. Some, like a lot of the sintered pads, will actually feel graunchy. They aren't nice, they don't give a nice feedback, they're race. But the Galfa was really nice. Yeah, I don't like static pads if you can avoid them. They have their own issues. But yeah, the original design, we've kept the very similar looking hub that part, and the back plate is much more reinforced and obviously designed to hold the caliper on there. It's still got the same spacers, the same bearings, the same bar that goes through, so all of those parts are compatible. The speedo drive is the same, all of that side is compatible, so you can get anyone anyway off the shelf. You don't have to buy those bits off us. You can absolutely rebuild it with anything else.
And this was, I'm guessing, because we talked about this before with your dad, and it's something that he's always thought the market needed, that it needed to look standard, because obviously there's people out there doing outboard discs which have a half a hub that looks standard, but there's still a disc hanging out the back.
I felt there was a need for that, and I think our response from customers who've seen the designs as we've been coming along has been very positive. Folk do like the inboard disc. They want that visual indication, as in, I'll bring that one through so you can see, but effectively once you've got a front mudguard on there, most folk could walk past that bike and not notice that that's not standard.
It does,
It's and if you know a bit more about a Lambretta, you spot that there is a master cylinder on the top. You know that shouldn't be there. But even the master cylinder, I've done my best to try to make the design something that someone who's familiar with Lambrettas but not an aficionado would be able to look at it and go, it's a Lambretta, and not go, what's that bolted on it?
And again, we looked at that this morning. Got a photograph of all the rejects, so you basically sat down with a variety of off-the-shelf master cylinders used on motorbikes and scooters, and just basically...
I'm a great purchaser of junk on eBay. When I was looking at the clutch designs, I've still got probably about 7-8 different clutches off motorbikes. Some will be under here, some are at home, some are there, that effectively if a clutch went for less than about 20 quid, I bought it.
So as your dad said earlier, when I asked him about 60s, he said, he looked around to see what was available, what he could read and what could be adapted, and you use the same philosophy today.
Absolutely. Don't reinvent the wheel. Smarter folk than me have already thought about it. That's a really big truism. You don't try to reinvent from scratch. Have a look at what's available, and then usually you'll just find that you can optimise by choosing the best bits of other designs. I really enjoyed in my engineering at university concept design, and often what you're kind of taught to do with that is break out each of the functions to individual steps and then try and come up with as many possible designs for each step. Then you look at that effectively big diagram of 100 different ways of solving a problem and go, well, those go together very nicely, and you can now pull those together and go, I like that as a whole now that works. And no one's currently making that because it's the ridiculously specific Rubik's Cube version of what I'm wanting to do. But I don't tend to be clever enough to come up with the concept in the first place. It's just figure out what someone else has done and see if we can make it work.
Make it work for a Lambretta.